All right, here we go. So nice to see everybody. Thank you for coming. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared. So nobody is under any obligation to share their screen or anything like that. Today's webinar is called Unlocking Your Child's God-Given Potential. So we're going to be doing a mini Bible study in this one. Thank you all for joining. It's going to be great. This is probably the webinar that I've been most excited about of any webinar that I've ever hosted. Here's an overview of our topics today. We are going to be, well, first of all, this webinar is directed to Christian homeschool parents. There are also BCBAs who will be watching this recording or who are attending, and people who are teachers or providers for children who have developmental disabilities, different kinds of challenges, learning disabilities, and all the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. A lot of people that I talked to in preparation for this webinar, a lot of parents noted to me that their children don't have a diagnosis, but they suspect that there's something going on. Some families have chosen not to diagnose their children. We'll get into more of that later about the reasons why maybe someone would and why they wouldn't. But our topics are going to be a spectrum of challenges. We'll talk about the kind of challenges that families experience. We're going to talk about God-given potential, as in the title, and what we mean by that, and kind of how to calibrate our expectations as Christians. We're going to talk about some of these children's new unique needs and how those show up, or unmet needs can show up as behavioral and learning disabilities. We're going to talk about what help looks like. I'm going to direct you to another webinar that I've done in the past that talks a lot more about that too. So you're going to get an overview here. And if you want to hear more, there's going to be another video that you can watch to learn about it. And we're going to talk about tips that you can use today. So my name is Stacy Olney. I am a BCBA, or a board certified behavior analyst. I've been a behavior analyst since 2021. I've also been a supervisor since 2005, and I've been working with children since 2003. So for a while now. Can't believe it's been that long. It's kind of weird. I am a member of Crest Avenue Baptist Church. I've been a Christian for 20 years, and I am a provider of behavioral support for children and families. So I have a leg to stand on two fronts here, both as a Christian and also as a provider of support for children. I primarily work with children with autism, but I also work with lots of kids with ADHD. I work with kids with genetic disorders. My credential as a behavior analyst gives me the ability to work with a wide variety of individuals, both children and adults, and from all kinds of spectrums and walks of life, because behavioral science allows, or the techniques and interventions that are provided by behavioral science apply to everybody. You can even use them on your dog or your husband. They work beautifully. So I started this company, LFA Behavioral Consulting, 2 years ago, and it's entirely self-funded. It's just me, just little old me. And I started it so that I could have more freedom as a professional to pursue the kind of cases that I want, the kind of work that I want, and hopefully to be able to serve more families. A little disclaimer before we really get into the meat of it. The information shared in this webinar is intended for general educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for individualized behavioral or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Every child's needs and circumstances are unique. Always consult with your child's physician, behavioral health provider, or other qualified professionals regarding any medical, educational, or behavioral concerns. Do not delay or disregard seeking professional guidance based on information presented here. LFA Behavioral Consulting LLC does not endorse any specific treatments or plans plans, or recommendations discussed in this presentation. The content is intended to support collaboration and informed discussion among medical, educational, and behavioral care teams, not to guide individual clinical decision-making. As a board-certified behavior analyst, BCBA, I share evidence-based strategies for supporting developmental and behavioral needs. The prayer and biblical encouragement offered up today come from my heart as a fellow Christian believer. These are not behavior analytics services and are not covered by my BCBA certification. All right, so now let's think about why we are all here. We know from James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. We know that wisdom comes from God. It doesn't come from us. And if we want wisdom, we can ask for it. It's the one thing we're told we can ask for and receive in abundance without, God's not holding back in the giving of wisdom when we come to him in faith. So I know everyone who is here participating in this webinar is here for wisdom. We all want that for the children that we serve and the children that we care for. So I'd like to say a prayer together. You don't have to turn on your microphone or anything, but I'd like to have a moment of prayer so we can all ask the Lord for wisdom today and ask him to guide this webinar. Our Father in heaven, we recognize that you are the giver of wisdom. We recognize that you are our creator. And we recognize that you have abundant and overflowing love for every one of these children that we are concerned about in our hearts and minds today. We ask you, Father, that you would give us all wisdom to love, care for, and serve these children in your image with the power that you provide, with the strength that you provide, and with the wisdom you provide. We ask all these things in the name of Jesus Christ and for his sake. Amen. Awesome. Thank you for the thumbs up. There's at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little happy face. It's a spot where you can access emojis. So while I'm talking, you can give me like thumbs up or thumbs down or happy faces and stuff. I really like those because it helps me keep track with where you're at. So don't feel like you're interrupting if you send me emojis or chats. All right. And also, if you have a specific question, you can also put it in the chat if something comes up and you really want to talk about it. As I was saying, we're talking about signs of problems that families see, which causes them to seek for help or to worry about their kids. Not all of these signs are necessarily a sign that something is wrong. We know that normal, typical children with, who are, never a problem, who get A's in school and don't necessarily get in trouble every day and don't have any problems adapting to new situations. We know that those more atypical children also sometimes still have issues with rigidity or even aggression. Even I hit my little sister when I was little enough. But the issue is that families are seeing these kinds of things persist in a way that does not seem normal. That's not the same as their peers, or that is disrupting their family or school life, or preventing them from accessing places of worship, or preventing them from going to the store, or preventing them from having a good time at the park, or all of those things where you see kids unable to access environments that other children are able to access. That's a big warning flag. Usually this is because these children are having tantrums. Sometimes those tantrums over things that are small. I watched a video of a child who cried for a great length of time in a restaurant because the waiter had cut his burger in half and his burger was broken. And this child was not like 2 years old or 3 years old or 4 years old, where some of that might be kind of expected. This child was somewhere between 8 and 10 years old. So that kind of stuff is why families seek my help and why families start wondering if something's wrong. So we have meltdowns. Tantrums and meltdowns for some people mean the same thing. For some people, they mean different things. For me, meltdowns typically means that a child is overwhelmed and becomes emotionally inconsolable. And a tantrum is sometimes an anger issue or an attempt of the child to control something that they can't control. So they become aggressive or disruptive during the tantrum. Then there's aggression. Of course, everybody knows what aggression is. Aggression comes in all kinds of forms. It could also be self-aggression. A lot of children who might fall in this category that we're talking about are aggressing against their own bodies. Some kids hit themselves or bite themselves. They may hit or bite others. You may also see property destruction. So it's aggression against the environment. I've worked with kiddos who break windows, kiddos who throw furniture, kiddos who put holes in their walls. And these are children who are from all different kinds of walks and levels of verbal ability. So some of these children don't speak, some of them do. Usually in a webinar like this, most of the parents who are dealing with children who are nonverbal and who do not speak, most of those parents have some sort of services because that's identified really early in a child's life. So typically the kinds of parents who are going to tune into a webinar like this are parents who are experiencing these kinds of problems persisting, maybe not the nonverbal. So most of these kids are probably talking and they're probably able to engage in some sort of some amount of schoolwork, but for some reason they're not thriving, or they're not advancing along with their peers, or they seem to be unable to learn new things, or they have these persistent difficulties in their ability to complete tasks. Among those persistent difficulties, you might see a child who cannot seem to organize anything, or the moment that you tell them to clean their room, they practically have an anxiety attack. Or maybe they're not able to take a complex task and break it down into steps. Now, not being able to take a complex task and break it down into steps, that is pretty normal. That is something that you kind of see a lot among children, but you should see a growing ability, and you shouldn't see a lot of fear or anxiety or avoidance around those kinds of tasks. So the kind of child who, if you put a math worksheet in front of them that has 20 addition problems on it and they burst into tears, that's a big problem. Some of those children may not have the same reaction if you have a whiteboard and you write one problem at a time on that whiteboard. Could be the very same problems, but it's the seeing the amount of work and not being able to separate it out in their mind or organize it by steps in their head or attack it, step by step. That's the kind of thing that usually ends up bringing kids to see someone like a behavior analyst like me kind of later in their life, not as a toddler or an infant, but rather as a school-age child. You also see impulsivity. This one is kind of a trigger for Christian families because of our ethics around self-control. And so impulsivity can come off as being disobedient. And kind of like can give parents worry about their children's moral capacities. And yes, that can be there, but when you see it from the perspective of behavioral deficits, autism, ADHD, and those kinds of things, it does kind of change your perspective on where some of that impulsivity might be coming from and what the solutions are. A lot of times, if impulsivity is coming from a condition that's diagnosable, a lot of times increased scrutiny and control by the parent around that, or increased consequences or punishments are not necessarily going to make that impulsivity better. It might actually make it worse, depending on what the child is dealing with. So milestones. Milestones are pretty important to know about if you want to know kind of where your child is in comparison with the great majority of children who are milling about. Like if I went out into the world and scooped up a bunch of children in a barrel, let's say scoop up 100 children in a barrel, I'm going to have kind of this, they call it a standard distribution. And half of the children are going to be considered, scientifically, statistically, they're going to be considered in the average range. And then you're going to have children on either end. The next 50% of children, 25% on one hand are going to be kind of above average, and about 25% of children on the other end are going to be below average. You have to be really, really careful. I mean, a milestone can help you identify if there is a reason that you should go seek help. That's probably, as a parent, the first place I would tell someone to look. Well, I'm not a parent, but I would tell a parent to go look at those milestones and check them. And here's a place where you can get a milestone checklist. This is Chalk. You look up Chalk's ages and stages, you can find a really good comprehensive list of milestones that goes all the way through, I think it goes up to 18. So all the different things that you should see normal kids, the abilities and interests and levels of development that you should see kids meet at different ages. So that can help give you an idea. Now, there's a lot of behavioral problems that kids might have that maybe they look kind of normal, and it's kind of hard to tell because kids are different, right? One kid, like when I was a little kid, I cried all the time. I cried at a drop of a hat. With some other kids maybe some other kids are not social simply because it's not because something's wrong. It's simply because they just don't, that's kind of their vibe. They just don't want to be social. But what the difference is, does it interrupt their access to their environment? Are they able to access all of the environments that everyone else can? Can they participate in school? Can they go to places of worship? Can they go with you to the store? Are they able to develop friends? Maybe they don't want to, but they're able to. So all of those things are things to take in consideration. And the caution that you have to have is some of the things that you might identify as behavior problems are actually in the normal range. But the difference is the frequency, intensity, and duration of the behavior problems that you're seeing. So we all know that tantrums happen for kids. We all know that tantrums can happen for kids even up through age 10, depending on the kiddo. And some of that can be normal. But if the tantrums are happening on a daily basis or several times a day, or they're so intense that the kid throws up and he's 10 years old, that kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that is problematic and worrisome, and that's not in the normal range, and you might want to look and see if your child has unmet needs. Another thing to take into consideration is that there may be some sort of trauma or medical issue happening that's underneath that. Like me, as a behavior analyst, I can help with behavioral issues. But if there's a medical problem that's causing the behavioral issue, there's only so much I can do about that. So this is what Chalk's website looks like with the milestones. I love Chalk's ages and stages because it includes child development from 4 to 5, from 6 to 12, and beyond. And a lot of milestones simply focus on infants. So this is a really good list for those in this webinar today. Now let's talk about different diagnoses that children can have. So one of those is autism, and then we have ADHD, we have various learning disabilities, genetic conditions. I would say about a third of what I've seen as autism in the literature that I've read and stuff is actually genetic conditions. So getting genetic testing can be helpful for some families. I have worked with a family in the past where they did get genetic testing, and then it turned out that their kiddo had some like super rare genetic mutation that like maybe 2 other kids have been documented to have. So basically it was not a help for them because there was no research. It's kind of obscure. There's like no information. So It was a lot of waiting and work for nothing. For other people, if you feel that genetic testing may be warranted, for other people, you may have a lot of answers that you were looking for. Some families avoid getting diagnosis, again, because some families are afraid of what might come out of a diagnosis. Some families don't want to get a diagnosis because they fear that their child may be labeled. But the thing about getting a diagnosis is that a diagnosis is a key to where to find answers and can help set your expectations around what might be best for your kid. Because let's say if you find out that your child has ADHD, there's so much literature out there on how to help and guide a child with ADHD. There's so many parenting videos on helping children with ADHD, how to develop organizational skills, time management, executive functioning skills for those children, that I think it would be terrible to avoid a diagnosis, because opening that door and knowing what's happening underneath can be so helpful. So I urge people not to shy away from knowledge and not to make decisions based on fear, especially around diagnosis. I really think that you should try to get your children diagnosed. And again, it is also, the diagnosis also provides access to services. So we have some ADHD, learning disabilities, genetic conditions, behavioral and emotional challenges. Some of those behavioral and emotional challenges may be stuff like pathological demand avoidance. That is a label that I really like. I've worked with several kiddos who have pathological demand avoidance, although that's typically not a label that's used in the US. For a child who has that kind of profile, you might hear it called oppositional defiant disorder here. I'm not really big on that particular label, but whatever. I don't get to control that. And by the way, as a side note, I have on the bottom here, I don't diagnose, so I can't help you diagnose, but if you need help, I might be able to help you find somebody who does diagnose or find you a referral. And the reason why I bring this up is because I was able to talk to some parents prior to this, and I know that some people who are listening are interested in this. So if your child has pathological demand avoidance or oppositional defiance disorder, there's a lot of parents that I've talked to in the past who pretty much believe that that is a choice on the child's part and that they're just very stubborn and that they need more discipline, and they may need more like punishment and control around them in order to help them kind of like get over and stop, kicking against the goads, so to speak. In my experience, actually treating and helping kids who have this profile, I have learned that that will actually make it worse. And if you need guidance, if you have a child who you suspect is suffering with something like pathological demand avoidance, which means basically that they are extremely stubborn, they won't do anything. As soon as you tell them what to do, all of a sudden they freeze up and they're ready to go to war so that they don't have to do what they're told. These are the kiddos who have 45-minute tantrums when they hear the word no. These are the kiddos who refuse to do schoolwork. These are the kiddos who will basically, as soon as they're told to do something, like maybe they wanted to play soccer, but then you tell them, go play soccer right now. And then they're like, no. And then it's a big deal. These kiddos are actually some of my favorite children to work with. I love them. I have a heart for these children. And for most of these children, what is actually going on beneath that pathological demand avoidance and oppositional defiant disorder, what's really going on is deep anxiety. And so they're managing their anxiety by trying to steal as much freedom as they can so that they can kind of like reduce their level of anxiety around things. And so then you have to treat that as though they're experiencing anxiety, and you have to, even though it looks like they're not, it looks like they're just being stubborn and even mean and disobedient. And yes, that's true, they are being disobedient, but the way to help it might look different than what a lot of people typically would assume. So then you have sensory and motor challenges. These are kiddos who maybe have, I don't know, unfortunately, I don't have my speaker notes and the word isn't coming to me right now, but there are sensory sensitivities that come up for children. I actually had, sensory processing disorder, yes. I actually had a supervisor back in the day who had sensory processing disorder, and it was very interesting to hear her talk about what that was like for her. So there were certain noises and sights and sounds and things that would make it very, very difficult for her to pay attention or concentrate, that she simply couldn't turn off or ignore. Like me, if there's like a weird noise humming in the background, I turn it off and I don't think about it. But she was not able to turn that kind of stuff off. And when we went to go get coffee at like Starbucks or whatever, she would say, "Please don't get a straw." And I'd be like, "That's weird." Because when I was drinking from a straw, she just couldn't get over the feeling like that straw was going to poke her in the eye. And she apologized profusely for it. And she thanked me very much for like just not getting a straw. But I thought it was really interesting as I work with different children, especially children with autism who have sensory sensitivities. And a lot of times I think it's easy to have the idea that like, they'll just get over it if I insist that they do. And that's not always the case. So let's talk about that God-given potential. Oh, by the way, there's going to be a Q&A at the end of this. So if the talk that I just gave on those slides brings up a lot of questions for you, that's fine. If you stay at the end, I'll answer whatever questions that you have. So God-given potential. This is our mini Bible study portion of our presentation today, which I'm excited about. I love this stuff. When we talk about a child's God-given potential, what are we talking about? I'm going to tell you right here off of the bat, as Christians, we are not talking about that child's ability to do math. We're not necessarily talking about their ability to read, although that's really good. And we always want our kids to be able to read and do math and perform all those skills, right? That's awesome. But as far as God-given potential, if we're focusing on school, if we're focusing on accomplishment and achievement and all the things that they can do and all the accolades that they can earn, we're missing something that's very, very, very important. And if you miss this, it's going to be a world of stress and hassle for you. And you're not going to be able to have peace either for your child or to give your child. So first of all, we have to remember that according to Matthew 22, 20, and 21, we're made in his image. And there's other scriptures about this as well. This one is one of my favorites. Jesus was confronted by the religious leaders, and they basically wanted to catch him in a trap. And they said, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Now, the trap was whether Jesus said, yes, we should pay taxes to Caesar, or, which is basically Rome, which is an occupying nation, or if he said, no, we shouldn't. Either way, it was going to open a whole bucket of worms and controversy, and they were going to be able to accuse him, whatever he said. So it was a very hot topic back then, whether people should pay taxes to Rome. And Jesus sidestepped this very, very wisely. And he said to them, whose image and inscription is this? He was given a denarius. It's a coin. And of course, Caesar's face is on the front of the coin, just like coins today. And whose image and inscription is this? And they said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So what is he implying? We know from scripture that we are made in his image. He's saying that just as those coins, those belong to Caesar, go ahead and give them to him, but you have a duty before God as well, and that is to render what belongs to God, you who are made in his image, who have his image and inscription on you, to render that yourself to God. And so we understand that we are made in God's image. The children that we love and nurture and care for and serve are made in God's image. And just as we must render ourselves to the Lord, we must also teach them to render themselves to the Lord. Because and we must remember that they don't belong to us. And that was my main point. They don't belong to us, they belong to the Lord. And so if we're talking God-given potential, we're not talking the things that we necessarily want for them as parents. We're talking about what is God's will for their lives. And we remember, looking at scripture, that we are created for good works. Ephesians 2:10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Good works being all the blessing and goodness and the things that God gives us to do under the sun for in his name. You know, caring for the poor, being a blessing to others, giving alms, glorifying his name, telling others about Jesus. These are the good works that he's given to us to do in him. And so if we're looking at what are the children that we serve, if we're looking at their God-given potential is also to do good works. So not necessarily to get A's in school, and that goes for us too, not necessarily to be a success, not necessarily to be well liked by their peers, not necessarily to fit in, but to do good works. And to love God and others. This is what we're called to. Mark 12:30 and 31. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So this also falls under a child's God-given potential. The God-given potential that they would love the Lord, their God, with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their mind, and with all their strength, and that they would love their neighbor as themselves. So as we're talking about God-given potential, we remember that this here is the goal. This is what we want for our children, and this is what we are called to render to them as parents, as caretakers, as professionals, as teachers. And then as soon as we see the last verse, we realize instantly that we can't do that because we cannot do all of those things in our own strength. We do not have the strength. We do not have the ability. We have to battle with sin. We have to submit ourselves to God and his forgiveness. And we don't have it in ourselves to do all these amazing things outside his power and provision. So we remember 2 Corinthians 12:9. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly will I rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Anytime we are relying in our own strength, and again in our own wisdom, remembering our verse from James, if we're relying on our own strength and our own wisdom to accomplish these great and beautiful things that we want for the children that we love and serve, we are not going to be able to accomplish it. There is a yielding that needs to happen in our spirit towards God, and not battling against our infirmities, but rather boasting in them, resting in Christ, accepting our weaknesses, right? And allowing God to show his grace to cover and to overcome those weaknesses, right? And again, there's another verse, I didn't write it down, but it's we have this treasure in earthen vessels, you know, that we will be able to show the glory of God, right? All these wonderful things that we want to do, there's no way that we can do them outside of God's help. And if we could do everything without God's help, where would be the glorification that God would receive? Because the glory belongs to God and not us. So your children were created to be recipients of God's unconditional love as you bear God's image. They may not be able to understand the fullness and greatness and goodness of God. Your child may not be able to read scripture. Your child may not be able to do all kinds of things, depending on what is going on for them. The hard part for a lot of parents is realizing that they may have to reset their expectations, and there's always a lot of pain in that. I have talked to parents who shed many tears, realizing that their children probably won't be able to read the scriptures on their own, or they won't be able to understand God's love, but they can be recipients of God's love through their parents. And that maybe is the greatest potential here. I personally believe, how do we apprehend the great pain that is caused when you realize that maybe a child that you either work with, care for, or your own child isn't going to be able to apprehend the dreams that you had for them? That's a very hard pill to swallow. But their being able to do all of these things is not required according to God's unconditional love. The thing that is required is that we, to the extent that God gives us and to the ability we receive as we submit to God in his spirit, we become conduits of God's unconditional love to them. And that is where the God-given potential really lies. So as we go over the rest of our slides, let's keep that in mind. And I wanted, of course, to touch on this slide because this is also part of their God-given potential, is it not? 1 John 5:13. These things I have written to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, that you may know that you have eternal life and that you may continue to believe in the name of the Son of God. So we also have this hope for the children that we serve, that they would believe in Jesus Christ, that they would know that they have eternal life believing in his name, and they would continue to believe. So let's talk about some of those unique needs that are showing up as behavior problems for a lot of the families who may be tuning into this webinar today. Some of those unique needs that are underneath those behavior problems that are really the story about what's happening, some of those are executive functioning issues. And executive functioning is your ability to kind of monitor and control your own behavior. So what goes with executive functioning skills are the ability to organize, the ability to plan, the ability to suppress your impulses, the ability to manage time also is an executive functioning skill. And there's other. Impulse control is top of the list here under executive functioning issues. A lot of kids with ADHD end up getting called lazy or inconsiderate because they can't ever seem to arrive anywhere on time. Some of these children are very bright and involved, but they just can't seem to keep up. These are the kids who are late, who are discombobulated. They're struggling to keep up with just like the daily flow of life. And sometimes you'll see these same kids shutting down a lot when they're given tasks because it's just another thing for them to try to apprehend and have to do during the day, and they're overwhelmed. Some of what's underneath might be emotional regulation difficulties. If somebody has, and this goes with sensory sensitivities underneath it. If a child has sensory sensitivities, this may look like them not being able to calm down until they're squeezed tightly. Some kiddos not being able to calm down until they sit in a dark room where there's no sound for 15, 20, 40 minutes. Those can be things that you might see if a child has emotional regulation difficulties, particularly if those are caused by sensory sensitivities. Some kids can't calm themselves down. And again, you see those emotional regulation difficulties. You're going to see it in ADHD. You're going to see it in autism. You're going to see it in oppositional defiance disorder. You're going to see it with a lot of genetic conditions, of which there are many. Some of these kids have developmental differences. You might work with a child who, for instance, has dyslexia or dysgraphia, dyslexia being difficulties with reading, dysgraphia being difficulties with writing. I'm oversimplifying it for time, but I do have another webinar on this, and I'm going to include the link for everybody if you want to watch that one too. Goes more into detail. For some kiddos, there are communication gaps that are happening, and these can be very, very hidden. And I've worked with several kiddos who have communication gaps, either maybe caused by underlying autism or other conditions that an SLP can diagnose. For instance, like auditory processing disorder is one. I work with a child who has auditory processing disorder. And sometimes when he's doing really, really well and he's in a familiar environment doing a familiar thing, he can track with what's being said around him just fine and he follows along. But then when he starts to get overwhelmed or starts to experience difficulty, or maybe he's got a lot going on or he's tired, all of a sudden, the amount of time that it takes for him to process what you just said jumps to somewhere around 20 seconds. And just to give you an idea of what that might look like, it's going to look like a big tantrum. So let's say you say, hey, go ahead and pick up your toys. And he does not respond to you at all. And you're like, hey, go ahead and I told you to pick up your toys. We got to go. You need to put everything away right now. And he does not respond. And you can see he's getting irritated. And then you tell him again, it's only been a couple seconds. Hey, look, I don't know why you're not listening to me right now. We have to go. And then you end up dealing with a tantrum that lasts for 40 minutes long over telling him to pick up his toys. And you have no idea what happened. What's happening underneath that apparent, maybe it looks like laziness, maybe it looks like stubbornness, whatever it is. What it really is he is not able to process the words that you told him. And it's kind of like a computer that is loading. It has a loading screen. If you keep pressing buttons, it's not going to make your computer load faster. So with this kiddo, when I work with him, I have to remind myself that if he's a little overloaded, I have to actually tell him to do something and then say nothing for 20 seconds. Hey, it's time to pick up your toys. Let's go. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000, 9, 1,000, 10, 1,000, 11, 1,000, 12,000, 13,000, 14,000, 15,000, 16,000. He's like, okay. And he starts picking up his toys. So did that meltdown have to happen? No, it didn't. And what was missing there was understanding about what's really going on. This is why I encourage parents to get a diagnosis, to have an assessment done and get a diagnosis if they can, because that might reveal something that is so simple. Like with this kiddo, just waiting. It also means that when this kiddo does have a tantrum, if you talk to him at all, it will cause his tantrum to continue to escalate. So you could have a tantrum that lasts all afternoon if you keep talking to him. And it's so hard to be silent because, obviously you want to help. If a kid's having a tantrum, you want to help them. You want to console them. You want to talk them down. You want to tell them what they need to do in order to calm down. But all of that just makes it worse. So this is one example that I want to stick in your brain about what's underneath the apparent behavior problem can be something that's solved. It's a simple solution that just requires knowledge and a different approach. So that's something that can happen with communication gaps. Same thing with this kiddo with auditory processing disorder. when you tell him, he's likely to misunderstand you easily. So you might say something, he thinks you said something different, or he has no idea what you said because the sensory processing disorder is an issue there. And so again, there's more arguments, tantrums, noncompliance, disobedience, all that kind of stuff, but it's just around him not being able to understand what you're saying. There's also kids with different learning types. For instance, a lot of kids out there are, and schools don't help this very well, but a lot of kids are very spatial thinkers, visual spatial thinkers, not necessarily, they're not thinking in words, they're thinking in images, they're thinking in shapes, they're thinking in 3 dimensions. Those kids are going to have a hard time with school, and it's just going to probably continue being like that. Unfortunately, schools aren't very good at this, but the awesome thing about homeschool is that if you know, you can change their environment, you can change how you're teaching them, you can change the kind of lessons they're experiencing, and then what was apparently a behavior problem or an educational gap or difficulties suddenly fades away, and then their ability blooms. And then they're able to do all kinds of things that they weren't able to do before, simply because they received the kind of help they needed. Sometimes also what's underneath some of these behavior problems are basically learned behaviors. These are habits that kiddos have acquired probably accidentally in their environment. And for those kinds of learned behaviors or bad habits, or maybe a tendency to have a tantrum in a certain situation, if there's not all these other issues under there, or let's say if these issues have been addressed and we're still having those behavioral issues, a behavior analyst such as myself can help alleviate that problem and guide you through and coach you through how to reteach that child a different response. So all of this requires a perspective shift. When you change the environment, you change behavior, and it makes learning possible. So for instance, me with the kiddo I work with, who I love so much, I love this kiddo, he's the best. If I just remember to wait, which I constantly have to tell myself to do, I constantly tell myself to wait, and I make sure I do that, counting in my head, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5,000. I want to tell him again to pick up his toys, but no, I wait. And then all of a sudden, there is no tantrum. He's not having trouble, and he's able to now learn, because it's really, really hard to learn when your child is having a tantrum. In fact, it's one of the pieces of advice I would give families is, do not expect your child to learn when they're red-faced. Do not expect them to learn when they're upset, when they don't feel safe, when they can't calm down, when they're experiencing high levels of anxiety. That stuff is not conducive to learning. So those issues have to be solved before you're going to see progress in the homeschool environment. What happens when learning becomes possible is we're suddenly able to teach children about how to render that good fruit in their lives and what that good fruit looks like. You know, how are we to be kind to other people? How do we show our love for God? How do we show our love for others? How do we show self-control? All this becomes possible when those behavioral issues are addressed. And you can only address them if you know what's underneath, as we saw in our previous slide. It also builds trust. Your child now can trust you. My kiddo with auditory processing issue, he can trust me now, that I'm not just going to come in and overwhelm him like they say, a bull in his china shop, and just wrecking stuff so he can't function. I'm able to understand how to work with him, and then he can trust me. And then when he can trust me, there's freedom. There's freedom for him to ask what he needs. There's freedom for me to be able to introduce new experiences to him that may have previously been something that would have made him anxious, but now because he trusts me, he has the freedom to trust me to lead him in these new experiences and to learn new things. And that also, on top of that, that builds tolerance of discomfort. Now he's able to experience small discomforts as I expand his world and experience a little bit more and a little bit more. And every time he experiences a little bit of discomfort that was on the edge of his tolerance, and then a good result happens, the trust builds, the freedom builds, the learning builds, and that good fruit results. So now let's look up what help might look like for different kiddos in different situations. So the kind of help that's out there is pretty various. I've tried to make a comprehensive list of where someone might go. Inland Regional Center is a state-funded organization, and Inland Regional Center, there's regional centers all over California. Inland Regional Center is the one that the audience of this webinar will be looking at. If your child is under the age of 3, the Inland Regional Center is the place you go. I would encourage all parents to know whether they're eligible to be a regional center client and learn as much as you can. And if you have questions or you want guidance on that, you can ask me. There are school-based services. Now, I know the kids here are not a part of public school, but there are many kids out there who go to public school so that they can receive independent educational plans, and so that they can get maybe the type of help that they can't get at home, like a one-on-one aid, like that comprehensive plan, special curriculum, that kind of stuff, and maybe a team of people who's working with them at school. So there are families who decide to send their kid to public school so that they can receive those services. In private school, you don't get an IEP, an individualized education plan. In private school, there is something available for families called an ISP. That's I think it's called an individualized service plan. So how do you get an individualized service plan for your child? Now, before I go on, I have to say, an individualized service plan might not be might be all that it's cracked up to be. All the hope and joy that might be in it, oh, yay, it might not turn out that way, because the resources that are available for children who are not in the public school system are not the same as the kids who are. So if your child goes to a private school or homeschool, they might be able to obtain an ISP. What you're going to have to do is go through something called Child Find through your local educational authority. I think I'm getting that acronym wrong. And your SELPA. The next slide is about SELPA. Other places you might go, or what help is out there, is through services like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech rendered by a speech and language pathologist, ABA, that's applied behavior analysis. That's what I do as a board certified behavior analyst. I do applied behavior analysis. There's vocational training for those kiddos who are aging up and looking to be independent. There's job coaching support services, general counseling, as you're familiar with, psychiatry, social work. There are independent living skills programs. That's what ILS stand for. And then there's IHSS, that's in-home support services for children who have medical or safety issues, and they need parents need some help making sure that they're watched. So how do you get all of this help? For most families, the answer is going to be at the top of the page with physician. You're going to go to your family physician and you're going to request a referral. You're going to say, these are the signs that I'm seeing in my child. I'm really worried. And you use a phrase like, I want to rule out autism. I want to rule out ADHD. And do your homework beforehand. If you're getting ready to see your physician to ask for a referral and you're kind of worried that you're going to get the runaround, you can go ahead and talk to me. I'll talk to anybody to help prepare you for that meeting. So you're going to go to your physician, you're going to ask for a referral. Through that referral, your child is going to receive a referral for someone who can diagnose them. That's not me. I don't do diagnosis. Usually this is like a psychologist, usually a psychologist with a doctorate. Wait lists are very, very long. So if you're on this path to get your child a diagnosis, you better start today. It might be 4 months or more before you're able to get that diagnosis. And then the diagnosis is what opens the door to treatment. You take that diagnosis, you take that psychological evaluation. I think they call it a comprehensive psychological evaluation. That just means it's a checkup generally all over to see everything that might be happening behaviorally, educationally, psychologically, all of the things. You're going to take whatever diagnosis your child receives and you're going to go back to your insurance company and then you're going to say, hey, we need these services. And that opens the door for services and then you find a provider. If you're going to go through school, like a public school, in order to get help, you're going to request an evaluation for it. And there's different kinds of disabilities. You can have a child can have a medically recognized disability or an educationally recognized disability. And so the school will do their own evaluation. Maybe they say child meets criteria for autism. It'll be other health impairment in that case, if I have that right. And then they're going to give them an individualized educational plan. You could also go for a 504. And then school's going to take care of your kiddo at school. Of course, that doesn't mean that you also get medical benefits or anything like that. It's a school. An educational diagnosis is different, right? So there's two different categories. If you're in private school or homeschool, you're going to contact your local SELPA. That's the next slide, actually. You're going to ask them for an assessment. You're going to try to get an individualized service plan. You can also go straight to private providers. I am one of those. I am a private pay provider. I don't work through insurance or anything like that. And I can provide you services without a diagnosis. So who pays for this stuff? If you're going through a physician, it's going to be your insurance, your medical insurance that's going to pay for it. If it's a school, it's the district. If you're going through your SELPA for an ISP, I think that is still the district that pays for it, but there's like state and federal monies that are involved. If you're going to Inland Regional Center for help and your child is younger, that's a combination of state and federal funds. And if you're going to private providers like myself, that's out of pocket or private pay. So for those who are in Riverside County, here is the number for your SELPA. It is 951-490-0375. You can also look it up online on the organization tag that's on there. The SELPA stands for Special Education Local Plan Area, which is the most convoluted name that I've heard of. I can never remember what that stands for. Special Education Local Plan Area. Riverside County is one of the largest multi-district SELPAs in California. There are 25 local education authorities. I may be getting that acronym wrong. Anyway, moving on. They coordinate equitable services for private school students. If you have homeschool and you also have a combination of like totally homeschool and private school, you're probably eligible. If you're purely doing homeschool, you're going to have to look and really investigate whether you can get an ISP. And if you need help, I can help you with that process as well. Services will depend on the district that you live in. If you're receiving, let's say, private school services from an organization, your services will probably depend on where that school is located. So let's say if the school that your child attends online is based in Murrieta, the services that you will receive through that school are going to be based on that district in Murrieta, for instance. So Christian help. Where do you go to get Christian help? Well, I didn't have a lot to put on this slide. I'm sorry. It's really hard to find Christian help. When I was preparing for this webinar, I was able to find several Christian providers just by searching for them. So we do have the power of the internet at our fingertips. For instance, if you were going to look for a psychologist, you could go to Psychology Today and you could type in Christian psychologist and you could find a whole bunch of them. You can do the same thing on Google. You can search for like Christian speech and language pathologist, right? You can search for, well, I mean, Christian homeschool. Hi, everybody, you know. But you could search for instance, Christian BCBA, Christian Applied Behavior Analysis. So whatever you're looking for, hoping to find, put Christian on it, do a search, and spend the time, do your due diligence to find it. If you need help with such a search, I am happy to help you with that. I love helping with that kind of stuff. So what we have to do, because there's not a whole lot of Christian help out there, you can create the help, form a DIY community, make sure you network with people and work together. That's one of the things that I want to do with LFA Behavioral Consulting. I want to make sure to have a robust network in place so that when families need help, we have people on our list and in our network who we can refer them to. And then it's not this long kind of search and you don't really know where to go and you kind of find answers, but then there's a lot of closing doors. If we build a network together, then that will become less and less of a problem. And then I realized as I was creating this slide that some of you might already have help. So it's not like you're attending this webinar and your child doesn't have ABA services or they don't have a speech and language pathologist. Your child might actually have these services in place already. And if you do, and there's still issues and problems, some of the issues that might be going on is maybe there's a values misalignment. And when I say values misalignment, some of this may be a misalignment between your provider and your Christian values. You may have different values and you guys are not gelling. It might be that's actually less common than the other kind of values misalignment, where, for instance, maybe your provider is setting goals for your child that you don't think are right or good for them. Or maybe they're not letting you into the decision-making process and you feel kind of left out. That's also values misalignment there, and that's what I commonly see. Your child may still be struggling because maybe the services that your child is receiving aren't really meeting their needs to what they could be potentially. It may be that your help is low quality. I see this, for instance, in ABA services sometimes, and I'm not trying to knock ABA or shoot anybody down, but I do see this sometimes with ABA services where the parent has somebody they see every day who comes to their house and helps their kid for 2 to 3 hours a day. But they never get to see their BCBA, so they don't get to put in their input or ask questions, or they never received parent training before. I do one-on-one parent training and coaching. And so therefore you're getting low quality help and you're not able to make those services mean the most for your child and help them in the way that they should. Another thing that happens sometimes is low quantity help. Now, high quantity help, being too high quantity help, is also a problem too, and that's a whole different webinar. But sometimes you're getting low quantity help, and this is very common for families who are receiving services because, for instance, lots of families are on wait lists, and the wait list may last a really long time. Or let's say your child really needs someone to help them in your home several times a week, but the person who their service provider is only available 1 or 2 days a week, or only for a very short period of time. So that would be low quantity help. You're not getting enough help. Or let's say your kid has speech services in place, but you need behavioral help, something that would be more appropriate, like you need ABA, you need applied behavior analysis services, or a BCBA like me to help you in your home, and you're not receiving that, or you don't know how to go about getting it. So these are all issues that families are encountering. I stated earlier that I had a video that I have already recorded that goes more in depth on all of these things that I've been talking about in this section of the slides. It's called Options for Children Who Learn Differently, and it is on YouTube. I will be sharing that link with all of the families who receive this. So if you're watching this, you're definitely going to receive this later. So I do want to tell you a little bit about my services because, that's there's a little shameless plug in here. I actually want to help Christian families a lot because I'm a Christian, and so I have a heart for my brothers and sisters in Christ, and I really want to make sure that they get the help and guidance that they need. My services involve one-to-one parent coaching. I also do advocacy. So if you're dealing with a school or if you're dealing with a private school, I know everyone here is homeschooled, right? But still, if you know somebody who's dealing with a school, maybe they can't get IEP services, I do advocacy. I also do life coaching for young adults who maybe are having a hard time becoming independent. And I also do social skills help. So all of my services are very tailored, very flexible. So if you're interested in my services, I encourage you to reach out to me. You can go to lfa.org, scroll to the bottom, and find my booking link and just schedule yourself for a 1-hour appointment. The 1-hour appointments are free, right? And I'm not going to be stingy. I'm going to give you as much free advice as I possibly can and not try to upsell you or anything like that. I'm not interested in just getting a bunch of money or getting a bunch of clients. I am interested in finding you the right services for your child. So now let's go into some tips that you can use today. There are some caveats with these tips because I'm going to give you some tips that sound very common sense. All the tips I'm giving you are based in behavioral science, right? Informed by my Christian values, but the tips, if you do them, they might not solve all your problems. So I just want to say that. It's kind of like if I'm giving you directions and I say, okay, oh, you're going north on Van Buren, great. Just turn right after you pass the McDonald's, right? And you're like, yeah, great, I'll totally get there. The only problem is I don't know that there's 2 McDonald's and you're like way farther down than I thought you were, and you're going to turn at the wrong McDonald's and go to the wrong place. So because I don't know where you are, all these tips are very, very general. But if you need exact advice, I encourage you to go sign up at lfa.org, find my booking link at the bottom of my little postage stamp of a website, and sign up for an hour consultation. And I'll talk to you about anything that you need. So my first tip to parents, and all of these are based on my parent training experience and my personal experience, is to manage your stress level. Just like the child that I was talking about in one of my examples who couldn't be compliant because kiddo was experiencing a ton of anxiety. Stress goes like that for us adults too, and us caretakers. You may know what you need to do to help your kid, but be unable to do it because your anxiety and stress level is too high. So you find yourself freezing, you find yourself escaping, you find yourself unable to move forward. It's very, very important that you manage your stress. And in stress management, you're probably going to need other people to help you with that. I speak about stress management as somebody who has experienced a great deal of stress in caretaking. And I mention this because when I was a caretaker, I took care of my mom for many years who had early onset dementia and passed away of that. And that was some of the hardest stuff I've ever done in my entire life. There was a period of time that lasted a couple of years where I slept in shifts. I slept 2 hours here and 2 hours there and 2 hours there because I was constantly trying to make sure that my mom was safe and taken care of, and I could not take my eyes off of her. That was really difficult. And when I would tell people about the level of stress I was under, they would say, oh, you just need to rest more. And I was like, where is that rest going to come from? And I would get so irritated that they would even suggest that I need to help my stress because I was like, there is no outlet. So that's why you need people to come alongside you. If you're looking for help managing your stress, that is another thing I can help you with on a non-professional level. Like, really, just reach out to me. I can give you my personal email. We can talk about it. I really don't mind helping people with this. I want to help as many people as I possibly can. Another piece of advice I would tell you is be curious, not afraid. As Christians, we're called to be of good courage, courageous, curious, and not afraid. Because as you're trying to figure out what's happening with your child and you're seeking wisdom on that, You're wondering what to do. You're trying to formulate a plan to fix these issues, to help your child experience joy on a day-to-day basis, and yourself as well. You're going to have to be curious about what's going on. Some parents, maybe if their child is not diagnosed, feel a certain amount of fear or shame around that diagnosis process, and that's what causes them to avoid. That is acting out of fear. That is not being of good courage. I encourage you to be curious and allow the Lord to console your heart. Ask him for that courage you need, because if you are afraid, you're engaging in avoidance behaviors, and you're not fully observing, looking at, investigating what is going on with your child and what they need. This might come down to simply like, the next time my child has a tantrum, I'm going to watch very, very carefully about what triggered it. Like, I'm going to be watching them all day today to figure out what is causing this tantrum to happen. Or I'm going to be watching them very carefully to figure out maybe if there's a sensory issue going on. In order to be able to have that level of attention, you have to be curious and not afraid. You have to be of good courage. Another piece of advice that I have is create joy. Create joy. Now, for those behavior analysts who are listening to this recording, how you would hear this is you would hear me talking about making sure that you understand what your child's reinforcers are and that you're delivering those reinforcers when you see the kind of behavior that you want to see more of. Now, for Christian parents, I want to frame this as create joy, because that is really what I mean in practice. Know your child. What are the things that make them light up with joy? What are the things that make them able to endure a long car trip? What are the things that make them giggle, that make them laugh, that make them run around the room, that make them giddy? What are the things that calm them, that relax them? And I'm not actually necessarily talking about things. Although as kids get younger, or as kids with cognitive impairments, or like as the level of cognitive impairment is greater, you tend to see kids enjoying tangible things like physical objects more. And those are going to be your classic rewards like candy or food or toys and stuff like that. That's kind of the stuff we see for like younger kids and kids who are cognitively impaired. But as kids age up, as kids grow and become more complex, their interests and the things that really create joy in their life, and we know this, are not tangible things. They are probably somewhere around your attention. Maybe the thing that makes them light up is when you just sit with them for 5 minutes and not tell them to do anything, but just enjoy their company. It might be that you both laugh at the same funny video together. It might be that like you make a joke or you're silly for a minute. There are all kinds of things that might do that. Or maybe the thing that creates joy is having more freedom, like an afternoon where they don't have to go anywhere or do anything. Or an afternoon where, like, for this afternoon, we're not going to do the usual. For this afternoon, you have more freedom than you usually do. You can escape from your tasks. Those kinds of things are also stuff that creates joy. And if you render those things, when you see your children doing those good works that you're looking for, when they're calm, when they are when they're completing their tasks, when they're working hard, and you're looking very carefully for those moments, and then you time that joy, you're going to give them that thing that lights them up. And if you time that correctly, you're going to create a feedback loop. It's going to cause them to naturally become more compliant and trusting of you over time. And this is kind of what I was also talking about, catch them being good, when I was like, render that joy if you're able to, when you see the kind of behavior and attitude and character that you're looking for. Catch them being good. It is easy to focus on catching kids being bad. Let's say mom's super tired. Mom's sitting in the kitchen. She's waiting for the spaghetti to boil. And the house is quiet. Everything's fine. She can ignore her kids for a while, right? Because everyone's being good. And then she starts to hear a commotion in the living room, and she runs out there, and Johnny has just exploded a bottle of soap all over the wall, and his sister's crying, and the dog is running around in circles, and it's chaos. That's actually a scenario that I've seen scenarios that are like that. And then kiddo gets in trouble. Maybe the dog gets in trouble too. Sister's upset. But the problem with this kind of waiting for something bad to happen and constantly being reactive is because it doesn't teach your kiddos what to do instead of being bad. If you only catch them being bad, they're in this feedback loop of being punished all the time. But if you're able to pay close attention and you're waiting for that moment when they're being good, even if that good is just sitting quietly, and then you notice, you perk up, and you're like, oh, I love how you are sitting quietly right now, and they're not doing anything. You're waiting for the spaghetti to boil. You peeked your eye out. You see kiddo sitting quietly with his sister, and they're actually like not fighting. And you say, oh my goodness, I love how you two are being so kind to each other right now and just sitting quietly. I love you so much. And you give them both a big hug. You just caught them being good. And that behavior now will increase. This is behavior science talking. Whatever you reward will happen more often. And also for kids, negative attention, even punishing attention, is better than no attention. So sometimes if you're not focusing on catching them being good and you're just constantly reacting to behavior problems, that itself can cause a problem and cause the behavior problems to increase. So instead, catch them being good, notice when they're being good, and make a commitment to give them those moments of joy when you catch them being good. That will change behavior in anyone. By the way, this catch them being good, it works on husbands, it works on pets, it works on coworkers, it works on families and siblings. Like, you can use this for anybody, and you're welcome. And I think this is my last tip. This is my second to last tip, is take the pressure off. To tell you a story, I decided with my cousin and my sister to take a trip to Pismo Beach because I remember being on Pismo Beach as a kid and how fun it was. It's a beach in California where you can drive right up onto the sand, and you can just like go from like sand to car to, and you can go play in the water, come back to your car and open the ice chest, and you can drive around. People have big rigs out there and everything. And I was, we're going to take this cool trip. We went on this beach and we got stuck in the sand within probably, 100 yards. We haven't even gotten to a spot where we can park. And we are stuck in that sand, and we dug the tires in, and we're trying to dig the tires out, and we're just getting deeper, spinning our wheels, and we're not going anywhere. And we're looking around at everybody else on this beach, probably hundreds of people. And we're like, how are they not stuck? What is wrong with us? It's so embarrassing. And then finally, somebody comes up to us to help us out, and they say, hey, all you have to do is let the air out of the tires. Just lower the pressure. And we're like, is that it? That's literally it. Yes, that was literally it. We let some of the air out of the tires instantly. The truck just climbed right out of that hole, and we were fine for the rest of the trip. So if you're in a situation with your child, you're trying to get something to happen, and the pressure is on, but you are spinning your wheels. You are not going anywhere. You're trying to get your kiddo to clean their room, and nothing's happening. And it's just turning into more and more and more pressure. You're digging yourself deeper with everything that you tell them to do. Nothing's happening right. that's the time to take the pressure off. That's when you need to let the air out of your tires. And you need to let the air out of your tires until you start to get traction. Parents, a lot of times wanting to be good disciplinarians and make their kids these awesome citizens, they have a hard time letting the pressure off because they feel like they're giving up ground. And yes, you are, but I guarantee you, you're not going to get anywhere by continuing to spin your wheels. Sometimes you just need to humble yourself. This is good at humble yourself. Humble yourself and take the pressure off. So with, let's say, imagine a scenario where you've been telling your kid, or maybe somebody you know has been telling their kid to clean their room. It's been all day long. No room has been cleaned. Kiddo is having more and more of a tantrum. You're spinning your wheels. It's now after dinner and you're looking at bedtime and that room still isn't clean and nothing's happening. It's awful. You can take the pressure off. Here's an example of what that might look like. You say, Johnny, look, I'm sorry for pushing you so hard all day. I'm going to help you. Okay. And you know what? We're not going to finish cleaning your room today. Let's just pick up the trash. Okay. So you walk in and you don't require your kiddo to do anything. And you just start picking up that trash and you hand them the trash can. You're like, here, hold this for me. And you pick up trash, pick up trash, pick up trash. What you did right now was you just took the pressure off. And that right there is likely to get you traction. And then you've got your child, or your friend has their child holding the trash can. That's something. And you're like, hey, pick that up for me. Okay, so it's right next to you. Okay, cool. Yeah, put it in there. Is that trash? Yeah, okay, put it in there. Oh, this is your little paper. Should it go over here? You're helping them out. And then they start being, well, okay, I'll put my shoes on the rack. They start putting their shoes on the rack. Do you see how you let the pressure off and then you start to get traction? This is a very, very important key in dealing with like meltdowns, tantrums, behavioral problems. And this is one of the pieces of advice I think I give every family that I work with. And this is also something that I do as well as a professional. Now, to note, taking the pressure off is not permanent, so don't worry. Eventually, in our trip to Pismo, we had to get off of the beach and we had to return to the highway and we had to fill up those tires, you know. So yes, eventually the pressure will have to come back on, and there are strategic and gradual ways you can do that. But in order to get traction, sometimes you need to take the pressure off. Oh, think in steps. I feel like this is going very long. I thought of a lot of ideas, but I'm going to make this one short. Thinking in steps. If you're trying to eat a camel, I'm sure you've heard this one before. If you're trying to eat a camel, how are you going to accomplish that? You're going to have that camel finished by evening? Probably not. Are you going to stuff it all in your mouth at one time? No, you're not going to do that. You're going to have to think in steps. You're going to have to eat that camel one bite at a time. A lot of times with behavioral issues and solving them, you are not going to be able to accomplish everything all at once. You're going to have to just look at the one next tiny thing you can do. That tiny thing might be picking up a piece of trash for your kiddo and handing them a trash can. That tiny thing might be, I have no idea what to do, but tomorrow I'm going to call their physician. So you have to think in steps. Thinking in steps and focusing on just the next thing you have to do can take some of the pressure off for you and make eating that camel a little easier to start. And my last one is give yourself a long runway. Give yourself a long runway means accept, embrace, and rejoice at the long string of failure that will be your first attempts to help your child with their behavioral problems. A long runway. The long runway is important. So if I were to graph what it looks like, let's say I work with a parent and I'm telling them to introduce a new routine to their child in order to solve a behavioral issue that they're dealing with at home. I know as a BCBA that what their progress in getting that to happen is going to look like. It's going to look like, if I were to graph it, it's going to look flat flat, 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 flat. It might look flat for weeks. I know this as a behavior analyst. This is just human behavior. It's going to be zeros. I'm going to ask them week to week, and they're going to be like, yeah, I didn't get it done. I'm going to reassure them like, no, it's okay. This is fine. I know that you weren't able to do A, B, and C. It's fine. It's okay. What you're doing right now is building momentum. The reason why I use the word runway is because this process of when you start something new, you're trying a new routine, you're trying to solve a problem. This process is like an airplane on a runway lifting off. You're going to have flat progress for a very, very long stretch. But that very long stretch is incredibly essential because what that airplane is doing is building momentum. Without that momentum, that plane will never lift off. And airplanes can't just jump straight into the air. You've got to move forward, keep moving forward consistently, even though you're not making any rising progress yet. Keep going. Build that momentum. Eventually, you're going to start building enough momentum in order to create lift. And then your progress will go up like this. And then suddenly the process or the routine or the change that you were trying to put in place suddenly works. Feels like it happened all at once. But there was this long runway of failure that happened in the beginning. And this is just the way that human learning works. It is just the way that behavior change works. There's no way to get out of the momentum building that's needed when you're trying to lift off with something new. So give yourself a long runway, give yourself a lot of grace, and just go with it. It's okay. So now we're going to open up to Q&A. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop sharing, and I'm going to stop the recording as well. So nothing that you talk about is going to be open for sharing, or it's not going to be shared or recorded or whatever.